So what happens when a group's promise of equality seems to clash with the politicians it helps fund? That's what we're digging into today. We're unpacking the claims in some source materials about the National Association of Realtors, pitting their official code of ethics against their political spending.
And this is really the central question, isn't it? When a professional organization has this really strong public code of ethics, how does that stack up against the money it puts into political campaigns? Let's break it down. All right, so to really get what's going on here, we have to start with the promise. And at the very heart of this story is the REALTOR Code of Ethics. It's the document that's supposed to set the standard for how everyone acts. And this is the big one for our story, Article 10. It's not vague at all, it's super specific. It says you have to provide equal professional service and explicitly protects people based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. Keep this one in mind because it's the standard we're going to keep coming back to. Okay, so that's the promise. Now, let's follow the money. The source documents we're looking at lay out how the political funding machine is actually supposed to work. So first up, you've got the REALTOR Political Action Committee, or RPAC. The official line, they'll tell you it's a totally separate thing. But the source material calls this a distraction. It argues that, in reality, between the constant fundraising at meetings and during dues renewals, the PAC and the association are basically inseparable. But wait, the money trail doesn't stop there. The source material points to another, maybe lesser-known group, called the American Property Owners Alliance, or APOA. And this is where things get really interesting. So where's the cash for the APOA coming from? Well, according to the source, it's pretty simple. 100% of it comes directly from the dues NAR members pay. And the connections don't stop with the money. The source also points out that the APOA is run out of the very same building as NAR in Washington, D.C., which, suggests the ties are more than just financial. And here's the final piece of the puzzle, according to these documents, the leadership. The claim is that the APOA is run by NAR insiders, which really seems to cement the alleged connection between the two groups. So why does any of this matter? Well, the source claims that this whole setup was allegedly used to funnel nearly $10 million, that's from member dues, through the APOA and primarily to conservative groups. And that raises some pretty serious questions about where members' money is going and why. Now that we've seen the how, let's take a look at the who. The source material doesn't just talk about money as an abstract idea. It follows it to specific politicians and presents their legislative records as case studies. The first example provided is Senator John Thune of South Dakota. Let's see what the documents highlight from his record. The source points to a couple of key actions. First, a vote against extending federal hate crime protections to LGBTQ individuals. And second, support for an amendment that would have frozen pay for Department of Defense employees working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are the kinds of legislative actions we'll be comparing against that code of ethics. All right, the second case study zooms in on Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. For Senator Blackburn, the source highlights her sponsorship of the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, which some groups have criticized for potentially harming LGBTQ youth. It also notes her opposition to marriage equality and her co-sponsorship of a bill called the Dismantle DEI Act, which aimed to cut off all federal funding for diversity and inclusion programs. And for our final example, let's look at the record of Representative Addison McDowell from North Carolina. For Representative McDowell, the documents point to his co-sponsorship of a bill to ban Medicaid coverage for gender-affirming care. They also highlight a different bill he sponsored that would eliminate the diversity visa lottery and also restrict family reunification visas. Okay, so we've seen the ethical code, and we've seen the political records of some folks being funded. And this is where the source material puts them right next to each other, creating what it presents as a direct contradiction between words and deeds. This really is the question that the source material forces us to ask. How exactly do these legislative actions line up with the promise of that code of ethics? Let's just remember that specific language from Article 10 again. Realtors must provide equal professional service regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. And here's where the source material makes its sharpest point. It contrasts that ethical code with actions like Senator Blackburn saying the goal of the KOSA bill was to protect from the transgender in this culture, and Representative McDowell's bill to ban coverage for gender-affirming care. The comparison is, well, it's pretty stark. So all of this brings us to the core argument that's being made in these documents, a major conflict between stated values and funded actions.
This quote from the source material really brings it all home. Equality is not optional. The argument is basically that an organization's ethical commitments aren't just words on a page, they have to be reflected in their political giving. And all this leaves us with a provocative question, one that goes way beyond this one case study. Should an organization's political actions be required to reflect its ethical code? It's a pretty crucial question for any profession that claims to have a code, definitely something to think about.